everyone. My name is Patrizia Marti from the University of Siena, and I have the great pleasure and honor to introduce Inge Birkerland. Inge is professor in human geography at the University of Southeastern Norway, and she has a PhD in human geography from the University of Oslo in Norway. I'm particularly happy about this keynote since Inge has a very specific focus in human geography, since her research interests are nature and society relations, people and place relations, post-human and new materialist approaches in culture theory. So I really think that she will bring a very original perspective to the conference. Inge, the floor is yours. And thank you very much again. I will monitor the chat for you, so just in case people will write down something in the meantime, and then I will collect the questions for you. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Patricia, and thank you so much for the invitation. It's a great honor for me to be able to talk about a little bit of my research and to meet with you here. I'm just now putting on my presentations. Can you see everything well now? Okay. Good morning again. In this lecture, I will talk about place, educational, regional development. And the aim is to show how place-conscious education may facilitate what I call ecologies of place. Regional geographers have for a long time studied this. What is regional development? I'm just there. Okay. What is regional development? For whom or what do we strategize regional development? I would like to stress from the start that I view regional development in a broad sense as holistic change processes in terms of human, social, economic, cultural, and environmental change processes affecting the well-being of a region or local area. We do not often talk about environmental or ecological development. Rather, we talk about sustainable development, which again is a concept and discourse with many meanings and approaches, but which generally refers to how one may balance ecological concerns with social and economic concerns and needs. And until recently, sustainability has not concerned culture and cultural sustainability. I'm interested in this integration towards seeing development also culturally and ecologically, based in a centering of development as place-based. My research has centered on education for sustainable development, working with place, and research on cultural sustainability, where we see culture as both a fourth pillar of sustainability and as the normative basis for development. The lecture will be organized in this way. First, I will describe how I understand regional development with a particular reference to the role of learning. Next, I will introduce you to the area of my research, the post-industrial region of the interior south of Norway, which share many features with other former industrial regions in Europe and elsewhere in the world. Then I will discuss the concept of place and the relationship between place and learning, and describe my approach to place-conscious education, and I will exemplify from research carried out in this region. And for this work, I introduced the term facilitations of ecologies of place, which I characterize by three features: relationality, attachment, and reciprocity. And this is for thinking through what ecologies of place may imply for regional development. Regional development is variously defined as a human geographer, I'm used to this research, but there are many approaches. One classic definition focuses on local and regional economic development. It's very often focused on economic performance and characteristics of a region. But development is a concept used in other ways in other disciplines and research areas. Development are more generally change processes which can refer to economic development as economic growth, material wealth, and technological progress. And in the part of Europe I come from, we rarely speak of territorial development, while I know it's a term used very often in southern parts of Europe. This economic understanding is self-evident for some, but for others who are oriented more towards interdisciplinarity, development is understood much wider. Development in education and psychology is related to human development, for example. When we in the education sector use the term development, we think of Bildung, human development, and learning. And if we are working in the cultural and social sectors, we think of development as cultural processes and cultural development. And here it can also refer to cultural regeneration. I think it's very important to include culture in our understanding of development in terms of seeing culture as an aspect of development. This leads us to see communities, places, and identities in the center, which is immensely important for any work towards sustainability. During the 2000s, we saw a transition towards new or alternative ways of looking at regional development strategies for localities and region. There was an understanding that traditional top-down policies had failed at the national level, while new bottom-up strategies at the local and regional level have developed. In addition, learning emerged a new focus. Learning emerged in connection with a new focus on knowledge and innovation for achieving the aims of regional development. Some have argued that there are 4 features that characterize these alternative or new local strategies. They require participation and social dialogue. They are based on territory. They entail the mobilization of local resources, and they are locally owned and managed. This means that for researchers interested in regional development, it is now associated with learning in a wide sense, where theories of innovation are connected with theories of learning. So regional development then is interpreted as the enhancement of the locality or region's ability to produce, absorb, and utilize innovations and knowledge through learning processes. But what is really meant by learning in relation to development? In research literature, learning refers to different things. The interest in learning is in this context connected wider to research on regional innovation systems very often. Learning is here defined as a collective social and geographical process that affects a change in an individual or organization's capability or understanding. And here the focus is strong on knowledge and stresses the role of knowledge influencing economic performance. This, of course, associated with the phrase knowledge economy. And also a focus on capabilities. In the beginning, the concept learning region was important. Then we find that there has been a move from a focus on the learning region to learning in a socio-spatial context, to localized learning, spaces of learning, or learning in space. It has been argued that the learning region concept has been conceptually ambiguous. It was problematic as it conflated the understanding of networks with regions and places by assuming that intra-regional networks are the most important thing for regional learning processes. Now the focus is on seeing learning as social interaction among individuals. In the center of the conceptual debate is the relationship between learning and space, as the regional geographers write about, or place or territory. But how is learning spatial or territorial? And how can learning be seen as an aspect of space or of place? Or what are we really talking about here? How is it really? This research or this discussion also started off then a focus on ecological issues and environmental concerns, and we may talk about an ecological turn in regional development discourse. As globalization intensified during the 2000s, regional development discourse could not at all steer clear of the issue of sustainability and global warming. The great challenge today is to deal with unsustainability and global climate change across all sectors. This leads, of course, for a need for seeing regional development in an ecological perspective, seeing strategies for development as important for climate change transformation, as agent of change for sustainability. So the big questions now for regions, nations, local areas are how innovation and learning and development in a wide sense can be sustainable and contribute to reduce CO2 emissions. So this is where place and place-conscious approaches come in, and which is where my research wants to contribute. I put forward an approach where we focus on place-conscious development, where learning is in the center. If we are interested in learning and regional development from a spatial and sustainability perspective, then I say we must take outset in real places, localized living. We must start with learning outside of the firms and businesses. We must start outside of the economic sector. And we must start with the education system, with schools and kindergartens, with the home place, civil society at the level of the local community. And before I talk more about that, I will take you to the actual area that I've done much research to situate what comes next in the lecture. Here is a map of southern Norway, where you can see Rjukan and Notodden towns in the county of Telemark. Research started here in Tinn municipality, where Rjukan is localized from 2005 and onwards. This is an interior part of Norway, with the mountain plateau Hardangervidda close by, but with waterways to the coast. Before industrialization, this area was remote and scarcely populated, however attractive for foreigners seeking the sublime northern nature during the 18th and 19th centuries. There were relatively few resources for farming due to a limited growing season, but the area has a long history of living heritage of folk art, craft, traditional music, and so on. The landscape consists of tall mountains, steep hills, forests, lakes, rivers, waterfalls, and farming landscapes. Some of the most narrow and typical valleys of Norwegian fjord landscapes can be found here, and the nature of culture of this area was important in the nation-building period of Norway during the 19th century. Rjukan is a Norwegian community which is a social, cultural, and environmental laboratory, associated with the birthplace of Norway as a modern industrialized nation. Rjukan is a very young town, just a little bit over 100 years, which is quite a difference from cities and towns in Europe with many centuries of long history. So these industrial settlements at Rjukan are founded upon the water system originating in the Hardangervidda mountain plateau. The landscape is made up of deep fjords and steep waterfalls, steep mountainsides. And the physical landscape has been a necessary condition for industrial development in the area. Water is important for all life on the planet, everywhere. But in this area, water is particularly important because they produce the conditions for hydroelectric power production. The company Norsk Hydro started developing hydroelectric power plants in the valley, which came to be the town Rjukan. which set off large-scale industrialization. The Rjukan waterfalls you can see on the right here was piped for producing power, and Vemork power station was considered the world's largest when it opened in 1911. Norsk Hydro started on, because of this, producing chemical saltpeter, which is artificial fertilizer, which was considered really important to feed the world's growing population and for the world's agriculture at that time. And in order to produce quantities of artificial fertilizer, they had to develop the facilities supporting this. They built several large power stations, Rjukan and Notodden towns, factories, transport system all the way to the coast. And this product, chemical saltpeter, was sold on the international market all around the world. And what was typical for company towns around the world, Norsk Hydro built housing, hospital, public library, churches, schools, other public institutions for the population in Rjukan. And Norsk Hydro was also particularly important for Norway because of its ability to draw international capital and use new technology in an innovative combination with capitalist entrepreneurship and a nation-forming agenda. Norway had declared independence from its short-lived union with Sweden in 1905 and was in need of both industrial jobs and a vision for the future based on the nation's own resources. So we have rapid growth here until 1920. And Norsk Hydro had a many-sided influence on local life and placemaking. Education was, for example, seen as important. It was completely different in the rural areas, as is to be expected. And of course, this development led to economic growth, welfare, and other goods, quality of life. However, the internationalization of the global economy during the 20th century, and particularly after the mid-20th century, we know there has been a global shift in economic power, which dethroned Northern Europe as a center of the industrial world. The center of the industrial world shifted to other areas of the globe, and many industrialized regions and localities in Northern Europe were left marginalized. Rjukan was particularly heavily affected. The population number, for example, started falling already in the 1920s and has continued to fall since. And Norsk Hydro eventually relocated its activities elsewhere and closed its activities here. And ever since, there has been a constant focus on policies for industrial and regional development and ways to increase growth in this municipality. And it is the fact that Tinn municipality is culturally very vital, despite this need for new economic growth. And we know that the population number now has been relatively stable for the past 20 years. In 2015, the material remains from industrialization in both Rjukan and neighboring town Notodden was inscribed on UNESCO's World Heritage List under the category of Technical Industrial Heritage. And as a World Heritage Site, Rjukan and Notodden expresses the valuation of new industrial developments of the second industrial revolution based in hydroelectric power production, industry, transport systems, and its urban communities. The local population today feel proud and strongly support the new status, as it is in some sense a new birth for the region after many decades. From being seen as a cradle of Norway, as a modern industrial nation with only a future and no past, Rjukan was for decades in the 20th century associated with a narrative of decline, where there was no future but only pasts. And we can say that World Heritage status offered Rjukan an opportunity to go through a new birth for a new future. The narration of the site, however, celebrates industrialism through representations of how humans and society have tamed nature. So this is the area for my research. It's an area I know very well myself, as I grew up in the area in between these two towns, alongside the Tinnosbanen railway, now a part of the World Heritage. In all this time, when I grew up, the message in the communities were, what are we going to do? What shall we do to make a living? Where can we get industrial jobs? What can we do to restructure the economy? In Norwegian regional geography, there is a long tradition of researching the fate of such monocultural industrial towns, as they are called. Monocultural since they are created and developed on the basis of a single economic sector, factory production and hydrochemical industry. They are very vulnerable because of this, as we have seen with Rjukan. Geographical research on these industrial towns has, however, mainly focused on the economic aspects and on economic performance. My research focused instead on cultural processes and cultural aspects of the industrialization. I was interested in investigating the underlying cultural assumptions of these processes, which then makes it important to discuss modernity's human-centeredness, our anthropocentric assumptions, making nature an object for social and human projects. As is well known, modern societies solve problems through social mechanics and instrumental reason. Nature has been seen a means and, with few exceptions, never a goal in itself. Modern concepts of culture imply a separation from and domination over nature. And culture has over time become more and more divorced from nature, and the relationship between nature and culture more and more mediated through reason. The overall view of nature is mechanistic. The world is like a machine. In my research, I aim for non-mechanistic views of nature and for a deepened understanding of the relations between nature and culture by more than reason. Reason alone is not enough for well-being and quality of life. In good places, placemaking need good relations between nature and culture. And in my research, I have engaged with the culture sector, with the education sector, and cultural organizations to facilitate change processes, working with place as a tool for change. First, let me say a few words about the concept of place in human geography and the human sciences a little bit more generally. We can say that there are three ways to do place studies today. The classic approach of seeing place is perhaps the way we think of it in everyday life, that we see place as a geometrical location in space, a point in space which we can identify through a geometrical worldview where we have latitude and longitude. Here we see how place can be represented as a sort of point in empty space. And the second way of thinking about place is how we normally think of it in the social sciences and the human sciences, where we apply realist or constructivist approaches, how humans make place, how humans experience place, feel and express identity of place, and how human societies have engaged with, constructed, produced, built, and changed our physical surroundings. And I'm working with a third approach, which is sort of becoming the new normal in the human and social sciences, interested in dealing with Anthropocene and climate change. It's post-human studies of place with a focus on the coupling of how human and non-human becomings, an ecological and relational approach to place. And this is a meaningful way to talk about place when we want to value nature and the natural environment in society. So this is a move from a human-centered and anthropocentric understanding, which we can see both the first and the second approach here are human-centered, while the third approach is moving beyond anthropocentrism. But in any way, for the third approach, we can say that place is both objective and subjective in a relational sense. It's not either or. We know place as this relation connecting us to the out there. It's an emotional, material, embodied, practical, and cognitive relation also. It's a relation. The inside and the outside is a relation. And there are so much very nice place writings and place theory to build upon. Thinking about place as basic for how humans experience the world, which is immediately more lived than known. It's more experiential than cognitive, because being in the world is the premise for becoming a person. Maurice Merleau-Ponty, for example, talked about place world rather than life world, because place is important. It's related to human self-understanding and to the understanding of the self's relation to the surrounding world. And this is also a pre-linguistic world, right? So this means that place makes us. We don't really make place. We are made by place, but we also make place. So the important thing is to understand that we cannot understand place as an effect of either people or the environment, but as a result of these entanglements. So for a long time, place was not considered very relevant in critical social science. It was seen as very static and apolitical, associated with border makings and romanticization of idealist images of home. It was associated with the feminine, with the past, with naive conceptions of the local world. And place was very importantly opposed, seen as the opposite of space, geometrical space, which was seen as more important, more political, because it could be talked about in relation to globalization, information and communication technology, all those change processes happening from the 1980s and onwards. But now place is seen as highly ethical and political, and as a counter discourse to globalization, a counter discourse to the loss of biological and cultural diversity, loss of geodiversity. There is a potential for place in revitalized understandings of politics, for place-based struggles and social movements. So this means for me that place is important for transforming both education, regional development, and innovation in ways which can have direct bearing on the well-being of people and those landscapes, places, and territories where they actually live. And place matters for regional development as it represents a meaningful category and a lived reality which offer possibilities for bridging dualisms and holding things together. So place, again, it's an effect of an entangled world, not something you can locate in space. Space is not the thing here. We talk about place. And the challenge is to show that we cannot take place as an effect of either people or the environment, to see this relational phenomena. So during the 2000s also, we saw a new interest in educational research for using place as a way to address the effects of globalization on education. In education, globalization has led to an increasingly standardized national curriculum with transnational standardized methods of assessment of learning. This simultaneously leads to placeless or contextless curriculum. It leads to alienation and isolation of children from the immediate context of community life. And several important relationships between context and learning that affects learning are missed with standardized ideas of teaching and learning. So place has increasingly been seen as an effective tool for exposing youth to learn and think productively about global issues and local issues like migration, intercultural understanding, climate change, environmental destruction, economic globalization, and for developing a discourse on contemporary challenges, whatever they may be. The international research literature on the intersections of place and education is growing. Place has been conceptualized both as curriculum and Bildung, as place both makes and teaches humans. We are made by place, right? But we also teach place and learn about place. And place is the world we learn about, but it is also the place we are from, who have made who we have become and where we belong. Very often, place-conscious education is called place-based education, based in an overall pedagogical theory called place pedagogy. I prefer place-conscious education over place-based education, as I am a bit fond of the reflexive approach in learning. But I also see place pedagogy and place conscious education as an approach to education for sustainability. It's a sort of community-based effort to reconnect the process of education and human development to the well-being of community life, we may say. We can also describe it as a sort of crossbreeding of critical pedagogy and environmental education, with place-based, place-conscious, place-oriented teaching methods. But place in education concerns much more than a teaching method. As a critical concept, place acts as a bridge between the global and the local, between nature and culture, between subject and objects, and this has implications for learning. So this means a thinking of place in other and more than human-centric ways. It means that place is an agent in learning, not a passive scene or arena in space where learning and other social practices take place. So place is not a passive scene for social processes. It is an agent in learning actively. And now I will tell one study from research in Rjukan. I will draw upon experiences from the activities in one of the participating kindergartens, a study which elicits what I describe as facilitating ecologies of place. And this work was carried out together with kindergarten teacher Astrid Aasen. Based in viewing place-conscious education for sustainability, the overall research aim was to strengthen children and adults' relationships to each other and to the home place where they live. The guiding question was, what happens when we see schools and kindergartens as resources for the home place, and not only the home places as resources for children's learning? Here is a story from the making of Moss Cottage at Vesletun Kindergarten. Vesletun Kindergarten built their practices upon three values: the values of natural environment of the local community, its traditions, and its culture. And this particular activity was with the 3- and 4-year-olds which had a focus on water. The adults named their project Vassreisa, which translates as the water trail, and which is the end result of the project as they created a public trail along a river named Jøst. The starting point was to make a path along the river Jøst involving different activities. The adults had agreed beforehand to let the children lead the way as much as possible and had planned that each group of children should find a place where they felt ownership and belonging. From previous experience, the teachers knew that children did find good places to play in nature. The adults think this is a competence the children in Vesletun have gained from playing in nature from as soon as they could walk, which means that we think that 3- and 4-year-olds are old enough to identify a good place to play. Vassreisa, the trail, was made by taking walks every week during one whole year. And Vassreisa is now a popular outing for families locally, a trail which takes about half an hour in all. The trail has signposts with posters and other documentation of the work. There are displays of what was found and what can be done along the way. Rocks, plants, places for rest, fishing, having lunch, places to listen, wonder and philosophize. And there are connections to the camping grounds for youth organizations 4-H and the Scouts. A version of a Herbie car was even made of scrap and things they found in the area, with a little bit of help from the adults. And the signposts were, of course, made by the adults and parents. Mosestua, or Moss Cottage, is the name of a good place. It's a clearing in the woods that was created by the 3- and 4-year-olds. Moss Cottage was also the name chosen by them. And Moss Cottage was made one day when the children started to walk down an old tractor road that led to a sandy opening, which had been cleared for laying down a cable. This was the place they called the Sand Castle. This day, 2 adults went walking further towards the river, together with 3 children. A few days later, they went with the whole group to have a closer look at the area by the river. It was difficult to walk there. Some of the girls walked first, all maneuvered their way through bush, branches, and glass. Suddenly, a nice moss-covered field showed up with large old trees along the river Jøst, and without any of the adults saying anything, some of the children stopped up and started to play. Others started to clear away twigs, sprigs, and branches. The next time they came to this field, the same thing happened. Some of the children cleared the area while others began playing. Tree roots became houses and buses. Some of the children found a tree that lay on the ground and started balancing upon it. What surprised the adults was the peace and serenity the children found. Without conflicts, the children regrouped into smaller groups. Play lasted for a long time. And when it was time to walk back to the kindergarten, they said they wanted to stay. And after this first day, the adults saw that the children looked very much forward to coming back to this place. They had not yet then found a name for the place, even though they had come up with many suggestions. So the making of Moss Cottage was not finished on this first day. What happened over the next weeks and months was a continuing creation of a place that simultaneously gave opportunity for the development of young children's selves. I would stress 3 characteristics here: the role of relationality, attachment, and reciprocity. I will now come to the concluding parts of the lecture. And again, to say that place is a meaningful category which offers possibilities for bridging dualisms and holding things together, like nature and culture. And instead of thinking with the dualisms, I suggest we think relationally and ecologically about place. I suggest that we decenter place from its humanist origins to avoid thinking of place as purely cognitive or mental or psychological. I also suggest that we decenter place from its objectivist origins to avoid thinking of place as purely allocation in geometric space. Relationships and attachments are themes that stress that schools, kindergartens, and their teachers are related to their local community in an open network of relations, a web of possibilities. And thinking relationally helped teachers in my research to see the connections and attachments in many ways. The teachers were experienced in using the local community as a teaching resource. What was new for the teacher was to think in terms of reciprocity, to see schools and kindergartens as resources for the local community, and not only the local community as a resource for teaching. One teacher said that she will take this further and thinking reciprocally, to give back in addition to having something. This is a question of attitude, she said, and quote, "The greatest use value for me is the different way of thinking, that we can give something back. This is the big thing for me. We are so used to use the local community, but it is new to give something back. We really haven't before thought about this, that if we want our children to be proud of their home place, they must of course see what their home place is." End of quote. The relational approach I'm talking about is partly based in the ideas of Isabel Stengers and her ecology of practices, which makes it possible to view any cultural practice as nothing like any other practice, just as no living species is like any other species. To understand place in relation to an ecology of practice means not to follow habit, but to recognize place as a situation, an event, that which has the power to affect us into thinking and doing differently. An ecology of practices does not approach place as essence, but as what place may be, as becoming place. This is because of a process ontology of a view of reality that is process, not static and essentially, but always becoming. And reciprocity is embedded here in this ecology of practices. It's this continuous exchange of energy, symbols, meanings, materials that other places are described in terms of flow, irreversibility, and so on. And this has some consequences. There are 4 consequences. And the first consequence is that place and placemaking is made by culture and nature, by nature culture. We cannot take nature and culture any longer as separate entities which can be studied independently of each other, because this defines and affects how we understand the concept of place. And this is also resonant with indigenous and dwelling perspectives where self and place are co-constituted, or it's resonant with writings on the pluriverse. The second consequence is that place and placemaking bridges disciplinary thinking. Higher education, as primary and secondary education, is structured according to disciplinary thinking. We have social studies, right? And we have natural studies. But where rarely do we think those subjects together. By taking outset in place, we can get some help to move out of this particular disciplinary time space of schooling, which fragments, isolates, and alienates students. It is a way of making connection between word and world, meaning and matter. And the third consequence is that working with place and placemaking help bridge the most consistent dualism, which is the subject-object dichotomy, which we meet every time we think of the person-place relationship as a subject-object relationship. Every time we think, I am a person, I'm here, but place, it's outside of me, there, so it must be an object. We should stop thinking like that and bridge that. We must rather learn how persons and place are relational phenomena, attached to the world, are made by place, dependent upon place, we need to cherish and value and serve place. This makes place more than objects to consume and use. And the fourth consequence is that we can think of place and placemaking as an assemblage of diverse agencies, of both human and more than human placemakers and agents. Contrary to what is the norm in the human and social sciences, I start with place rather than humans. Place comes first. Without place, humans do not exist or act independently. And to conclude, of course, this affects regional development. Learning is important for regional development, and I stress that place-conscious approaches to learning is productive for regional development. This focus on place-conscious education reflects a need for a broader understanding of development in terms of place-based and place-conscious well-being and sustainability. This requires also a broader understanding of learning as territorial, spatial, placial in terms of being place-based. This means that we must include all placemakers in a place, not only human, but also the more than human placemakers, inhabitants and agents. In the project in TIN, I focused on water and the agencies of water. And so we saw that the World Heritage Site was based on valuation of the man-made agents, not the natural agents in the landscape. But we need to affirm all agents in places. So this also means that agents in learning for regional development are not only social and human, not only economic institutions, businesses, firms and corporations and organizations, families, but the natural agents, physical or biological. And my approach to regional development and place-conscious learning has been one where I do not place humans or society above nature, but focusing on the entanglements. And this is the characteristics of an ecology of place. And in the context of climate change, I think it is very important to discuss this and to criticize the victories made by industrialization. Global climate change is a product of industrialization, basically. And global climate change reshapes the way we think about ourselves and about society and about nature. It challenges understandings of the past, what we as humans are able to do and should preserve and make and create. It challenges our perceptions of both the past and our future. And this, of course, challenges our understanding of learning, of human development, and how we think about learning. What kind of pedagogical shifts are needed? How are we to situate education in ways that respond to climate crisis? These are very important questions to focus on. With an increasing focus on education's role today for creativity, innovation, and new economic growth, there is a danger that one forgets asking what subjects, what skills are essential for meeting future challenges. And I view the challenges of deindustrialization and regional development as an ecological crisis associated with global environmental problems and climate change. The challenge is not to secure unlimited economic growth, but to secure health and life quality for all, not only humans, but all beings on the planet. and to secure sustainable forms of production and consumption and technology. Learning is thus related to society's ability to sustain both their natural and cultural environments, sustaining places. So that was my lecture, and I thank you very much again, and thank you for your attention. And I'm happy to discuss and continue reflecting more upon this if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Inge, and let us to do a virtual applause to for your keynote. Is there anyone who wants to start with one question? Please raise your hand or just write your question in the chat. Okay, I will break the ice with a question. So thank you. It was really an inspiring talk, and I was it was so convincing that I was wondering why it is so difficult to think about sustainability in cultural terms. Since all people nowadays talk about sustainability. There is, I mean, a lot of attention also at the European level with a lot of money put on this. But mainly the discourse is around the environment, is around the economic development or social development. And of course, this cultural view of sustainability, puts all these things together. So I was wondering why it's so difficult to take this view. And so this is my question. I know that it is a difficult question. And then just a comment. I like very much your idea that we have to move beyond human-centric visions of everything and of design in particular. The same discourse is going on in human-computer interaction design, because technology is seen as an agent. So also, for example, with all these artificial intelligence based applications and so forth. So there is an agency there, and this is again something that we have to negotiate with the place where we inhabit, and also technology is a place, in your sense. So these are my two questions. I don't know how you want to interpret them.
Oh, it's very interesting and also very difficult questions. Yes. I can start with the first. Why it is so difficult? Well, we have this scientific worldview, which is based and originates in over many centuries, right? Which has this organized structure based in Cartesian philosophy, consciousness thinking. So this scientific worldview has produced so many good things. So it's really some of the best things I think that human civilization has made, and which I think all of us are very proud and happy to be part of this historical movement of science, really. For myself, I don't come from the technology sectors. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a specialist in communication and information technology at all. I have no research experience from that part, but I I know there is discussions on this agency of technology, as you mentioned. For myself, I have been, probably because I have been more, I come from this part of the world where we are not many people in Norway, right? There's lots of nature here. So how to survive, how to struggle, how to make a living in these environments have been big issues. And then sustainability has always, as long as people have lived in my part of the world, which is since the last ice age, which is about 8, 10, 12,000 years ago, it's been relating to finding the means for survival in the environments, adaptation in sustainable ways. And then in modern time, things changed very quickly. And then we had the Bruntland Commission in the 1980s, and we had the Bruntland report and the acknowledgement that the world society needs to do something seriously about development, because it was obvious that development was unsustainable. Something was not good. So, and then, of course, because we have this division of labor in the disciplines, in the sciences, of the natural sciences and the human sciences. We have this sort of dualist way of thinking, which is so deeply ingrained that we think of environment sustainability on the one hand, and we think about social or economic sustainability on the other hand, and struggle to reconcile this thinking holistically about it, or integrating or finding ways to having a shared language. We don't have a shared language for talking about sustainability in a holistic sense. So it's no wonder that culture didn't play a role in the work on sustainability, that we had a triple definition of sustainability, right, which you know very well. And I think it was an effect of globalization, basically, and the work that UN did when diversity came. You know, cultural diversity issues became so important for UNESCO from 2003 onwards, and in all the cultural policies around, at least in the Western world, started acknowledging that cultural diversity is a value. It's important. We cannot lose it. We know that biological diversity is difficult, but cultural diversity is also really important. And then started the discussions on the role of culture for sustainability. And
we have other questions.
Yes.
Sorry if I interrupt you.
No
just
problem.
to give the other people some opportunity to ask questions. So the first one is Tryon.
Hello, thank you, Inger. Very insightful talk. I have two questions. The first one is how can we put place conscience education in a formal curricula which exists in most countries? Like how can we blend it? Is there a place when we can do this better? Like is it in early education? Or maybe even in high schools, like is there a place where it's better and where we stop? And the other question, like of course it's cultural, and cultural depends a lot on the country and people and region. Do you see any differences between I don't know, studies you have done in Norway and countries which are maybe poorer, or like Romania? Like we have in Romania lots of regions similar and places similar to the one you described in your study, have you seen any studies? Like, there is a lot to talk, maybe just some brief insights for me. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for the lovely questions. I think regarding place-conscious education, there's many research articles that can be inspiring, and any teacher in any disciplines, in any level of education, can of course work with this at any time. It's a super framework for integrating learning outcomes, for example, making connections across the disciplines. So, and you can always translate national curricula into a local curricula. But it needs some reflexive work from the teachers or the educator, whether it's within formal or more informal education. But it makes, it's highly motivating for the students, because the education is possible to be seen as more relevant, because it connects very closely to the way of life of those who are the agents of learning. So there are, it's just to start really, and to develop own experiences and read the research literature which has been produced. Regarding comparative cases, yes, of course, I have not done any research in other areas, but we know the same processes of heritageization is taking place in post-industrial regions, in the former industrial area of Europe and North America. China, Russia, Eastern Europe, there are so many former industrial places going through similar processes of dealing with cultural and social economic consequences of deindustrialization. So, but there is a very high interest in, for example, UNESCO to look upon these heritage places as resources for development rather than a cost, because we normally think of these areas as very costly and ugly sometimes also. But there's a new discourse on seeing this as resources for development.
Thank you very much, Inge. I think like ex-communist countries would be a great study because at least in Romania, probably half of the industry has fallen down when going from communist to capitalist, like we're going from a centralized industry to a capitalist and concurrency, being part of the capitalist world. Yeah, thank you. Great comments.
Okay, we have another question from Carlo.
Yes, hi. Hi, Inge. Thank you very much for your inspiring talk. That remind me about the global perspective, let's say, and also the relevance of fluxes, the dynamics of the place instead of the statics, and also to the coevolution among human and environment, that more or less, I guess, is what you call post-human perspective. In this framework, my question is, in this complex ecosystem, of course, all time there are some tension that grow up, and I'm wondering, I would like to ask you if you have any hints about how this tension can be solved. For example, the tension that may derive from the age of the students, because you illustrate a case of a kindergarten, but this is not probably cannot be applied in the same way to teenagers, for example, or the tension that may derive from a completely different place that is strongly determined by the culture. For example, consider the tension in big cities, in the suburbs of big cities. And from all this, I mean, also, how do you think that competency should be developed, skill and competencies should be developed by the students? I mean, not just, I mean, life competence, the competence that you need for the life, not just to deal with your local place. So you see, there are many tensions, let's say, that in some sense should be taken with. Okay,
yeah.
thanks.
Yeah, very nice and important questions. I look upon these issues that might be seen as tensions. I look upon them not as tensions, but as reality, really. The point is for us to recognize and to work with the fact that we are placed in the world. We are placed in particular places. The schools are particular places, whether they are in a big, old, ancient, nice city, or whether they are in a rural area. So that doesn't mean that a rural area is natural, or that a city is culture. Both are nature cultures. And the point is to work with the actual possibilities for actual learning processes. It doesn't make sense to me to make a sort of opposition between the aims and learning outcomes, for example, in national curricula or in particular state-defined curricula, as opposite the possibilities of the local area. The key is actually that the teacher and the teacher's skills in understanding, analyzing, seeing the potential learning possibilities in the local area, whatever it is, and there are always potential anywhere. It doesn't matter if it's a city or a rural area. The potential is there everywhere, and you have to just translate that potential in relation to learning outcomes. So the point is by connecting learning activities to the potential possibilities in the local area, in the home place, is providing the learning processes with an element of relevance, which helps in the motivation for learning. And for many young people, and also in secondary schools, motivation for learning is an issue. So you have to build upon the skills, the knowledges, and the competence in the local area, and to develop good teaching practices from there. Some researchers in education, very focused on assessing learning outcomes, are really struggling understanding this qualitative approach. So I think it's sort of you have to start with reality, with the individual people and pupils, whatever age they are. You have to analyze, understand, interpret where you are. You cannot take a sort of recipe. You have to do the analysis of where you are first.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I don't see other hands raised. So in this case, I think we can thank again Inge.